The issue of Muslims becoming radicalized in Canada and around the world is a controversial issue that some completely shy away from talking about, while others may take a real hard line on it. Today's guest is no stranger to talking about it. Raheel Raza, president of the Council for Muslims Facing Tomorrow and author of the book, Their Jihad, Not My Jihad. Raheel, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you.
Now, can you tell me briefly what the Council for Muslims Facing Tomorrow is all about?
Yes, our mission is to reclaim Islam as a religion of peace by opposing extremism, violence, and fanaticism in the name of religion. And our vision is to invite Muslims to come into the 21st century, that therefore use of the term tomorrow, and to look into the future, to embrace the values of liberal, small L liberal democracy, gender equality, to condemn armed jihad, to embrace separation of mosque and state, and all the values that brought us here.
Now, there's some Canadians who have a certain degree of fear of Muslims, Islamophobia, especially with a lot of the terrorist attacks we've seen over the last 10, 15 years, largely because of the radical elements that we see rise up at times. Should we be worried about Islamic radicalization in Canada?
Well, I'm a Muslim, and I can tell you that I'm worried about Islamist radicalization. And I like to differentiate between Islam and Islamism. Islamism is the political ideology. That is the radical ideology. And so, yes, radical Islamist ideology is something that we should all be worried about. We've seen the recent attacks in Canada. We have seen our government trying to appease the communities instead of actually addressing the issues head on. That radicalization does exist, and it's of two kinds. There's a violent terrorist radicalization, which results in killing and violence. And then there is the nonviolent extremism, which is the ideology. And we have to be worried about both.
What do you think of the idea of potentially putting spies in some of these radicalized mosques who are preaching and teaching against killing the infidels and maybe attacking Canadians?
Well, I wouldn't call it spying. I have a very extreme view on this, and I've written about it, and I did put out a call to all Canadians. I believe that any place of worship, whether it's a mosque or any other place of worship, if they are promoting hate, if they are calling their youth to violence and jihad, it should be shut down. Because this is not a place where we promote hate. And you have to remember that radicalization is the result of hate mongering. It's a very simple connection of the dots. How do ordinary young people get radicalized? They get radicalized because they are taught hate. They're taught to dehumanize the other. If this is happening in our institutions or in our mosques, then I certainly believe that they should be shut down.
Now, how would you define a radical Muslim? Where does that line get crossed?
Well, a radical Muslim is a person who goes directly against the mission and vision statement and the values that I presented to you, someone who supports the idea of armed jihad, who justifies violence in the name of religion, who does not believe in gender equality, who does not respect those who follow a different path. For example, a people of other faiths or people of no faith. And this is something we are very clear about in our mission statement, that we respect everyone who follows a different path, whether you're a believer or a non-believer, whether you are from the LGBTQ community, whether you're a minority, we have to respect everyone equally. And radicals are those who don't. They are dogmatic, and they only believe that what they say is right.
Is it just a small percentage of Muslims who are radicalized?
That's a very tricky question. Because, yeah, the short answer is yes. But then when you look at a small percentage of 1.8 billion Muslims, that's a large number. Now, there is a very short, very fantastic documentary that's been made by the Clarion Project. It's called By the Numbers. I have narrated it. It has been well researched based on a Pew poll, which tells you the mindset and ideology. We can't forget that we are at war, a war of ideas. The radicals, the extremists, ISIS, Taliban, Al-Qaeda, whatever name you call them, they're all the same. They have declared war on the West and its values. And it's, again, as I said, a war of ideas. Now, when people have bad ideas, negative ideas, ideas about violence, ideas that say that it's okay to kill someone who is in, it's okay to kill a woman who has had an extramarital affair, or it's okay to kill people who are homosexuals. These are ideas. They may not be doing it, but the ideas are there. So these are radical ideas. And therefore, it is a very dangerous trajectory. And from what we have seen since 9/11, this ideology has grown and it has been promoted and funded by petrodollars from the sands of Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Iran and through institutions.
The Liberal government has gone on record saying that radicalized Muslims can be rehabilitated. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, there have been some instances of radicals who have come back round, but very few and far between. There's Majid Nawaz in England who runs the Quilliam Foundation. There are one or two in America. But it, as I said, because it's an ideology, I suppose it could be reversed. Radicalization is a result of big brainwashing, and it could be, but you have to have very extensive programs. Does our government have programs to de-radicalize people? No, they can't even use the term radicalize. I mean, now you've got M103, which is a motion that doesn't allow us to have this conversation because you will be called racist. You're not a Muslim. I'm also called anti-Muslim. This is the problem that we have here. So how are we going to de-radicalize anyone when we don't even understand what the virus is, what the problem is? What we are trying to do is treat a disease, a very, very extensive disease like cancer with aspirin, with Band-Aid. It doesn't work. Yes, I suppose there could be de-radicalization, but you have to have excellent programs in place.
What about moderate Muslims? Are they speaking out against radicalization? And if not, why?
Well, there are a large number of moderate Muslims that come and sit in my living room and they will agree with us, but they won't say anything in public. So, the problem is they're not speaking out enough. This is what we call the silent majority. The people who are not radical, they're sitting on the shelf, but as far as I'm concerned, if they don't speak out, they are part of the problem. Now, they don't speak out for many reasons. They're afraid. They're afraid of physical harm. Look at what happens to people who speak out. They're killed. And so they're afraid. They've been brainwashed into political correctness. And let me tell you that our mosques and our institutions, many of them promote what is known as the victim ideology, that no matter what happens, you as Muslims are the victims. You've got an organization called CARE, which is the Council on American Islamic Relations, which also has a branch here in Canada called the NCCM. They promote this victim ideology. That's why we've got M103, so that anytime there is a conversation about radicalization or Islam or Muslims, it's shut down.
Now, is part of the problem a lack of integration into Canadian society? Many immigrants tend to live together in the same community, the same pockets, and don't get to know people from other cultures.
Well, that is part of it, but every immigrant community that has come into Canada has tried to live together because it's practical, it's a sense of comfort and security. But the next generation, the children, do integrate, they assimilate, they become part of the mainstream. And how do we do that? By embracing Canadian values. Now, here we are in Canada, where thanks to our government, we are not even allowed to talk about Canadian values. When I speak to Canadian audiences and I say, you must speak to your children, you must teach them Canadian values. This is why we came here. They say, what are Canadian values? Canadian values are the values of humanity, respect, tolerance, gender equality, freedom of expression, extremely important. And this freedom of speech and freedom of expression is being curtailed at every step in universities, in all educational institutions, and in government. So we have a government that sort of wants to deflect, look the other way, and act like nothing is happening, whereas people have been killed on the streets. So yes, integration is a problem.
Now, mainstream media seems quite hesitant to call out radical Islamists as being radical. Now, I saw your quote on Twitter recently with regards to the Toronto Danforth shootings. You said, if we Muslims don't own up to the problem of radicalization, these mental illnesses will only grow. And I haven't seen a statement by Canadian Muslim MPs on the Danforth shooting. Could it be Islamophobia maybe stopping them?
Well, they would like to say that. I think it's a deflection. It's not addressing the issue head on. We waited for them, not just the Muslim MPs, but any MPs, for our Prime Minister to make a statement to say, we have a problem of radicalization. How difficult is that? But yes, mainstream media is so much into false news, into fake news. They need to address the issue head on. Very often we have these incidents, and for a moment there is a lot of news, and then it just dies out. And people never find out what really happened. We have a problem of addressing the issue head on. A doctor will tell you that if there's a virus, unless you identify it, you will never find a treatment. Radicalization is a virus, and we have not been able to identify it. Therefore, we will not be able to find a solution.
So if there's a potential of radicalization in my neighborhood and I know about it, what should be the first step? Should I reach out to police and let them know? What are your thoughts?
Yes, I believe you should. Whoever the authorities are, whether they're security agencies, whether it's the RCMP, whether it's CSIS, I mean, they are clamoring and begging people to help them. They want to speak to communities, but there is a door that's shut on them. I know, because they do reach out to us and say, how can we go and speak to the communities? But these communities, the Muslim communities at large, especially the newer immigrant communities, have been told by certain mosques and certain organizations, do not help the authorities, do not speak to them, they are your enemy, they are going to try and cause you harm. And so they don't speak out. So there isn't that communication between the communities and the law enforcement agencies or the security agencies.
A contentious issue a little while ago was between the Tories and the federal Liberals, whereas the Liberals say once a Canadian, always a Canadian. Somebody from Syria or Iraq comes over, they have these radicalized ideas, they murder Canadians. The Tories were saying you lose that Canadian citizenship and you get shipped back to the country where you came from. The Liberals say, no, you'll always have your Canadian citizenship regardless. If you go out and murder people, you're radicalized, it doesn't matter. What are your thoughts about dual citizenship?
Well, I have a lot of difficulty with the idea that if someone who has taken Canadian citizenship and then is traitor to the country by going and fighting a jihad should not be given that Canadian citizenship, or they should be stripped of that Canadian citizenship, because that's treason. It's very clear for me. It's black and white. Now, thanks to this policy of appeasement, this wishy-washy policy, we have 60 ISIS fighters back in Canada because the Liberal government believes that, they should live like ordinary citizens. I have met a Yazidi girl who was enslaved, raped, and sold many times, who came here as a refugee and then saw her ISIS captor face to face on a bus. Now, one should ask her how she feels about this. So, I have very clear opinion on this, that if someone is not in favor of this country and its values, they shouldn't be here. There are many countries where they can go and fight the jihad. There still are. So why are they bringing those ideas, those values, those radical ideologies here? And why is our government welcoming them with open arms? Canada has more or less become a safe haven for all kinds of criminals from all over the world. Let's go to Canada. There we can live safely. We'll be given Canadian citizenship. They'll even help us with our mortgage.
You know what? Let's talk a bit about immigration. Should Canada continue to open the doors wide open for refugees from Islamic countries? Or do we maybe do things a little bit differently and maybe bring in proper vetting or more vetting?
As a human rights activist, as a human being, a mother and a grandmother, I believe that, it's very important to help people who are in trouble. But let me put out a simple analogy. Would I invite someone into my house if I didn't know who they were? No, I wouldn't. Even though they were in trouble, I would like to know who they are. We need to have better, more consistent vetting policies. We need to know who these people are, just like any other immigrants or refugees. They should be put to the same standards of vetting like we did. My ancestors were traced back like 4 generations before I came to Canada when I applied for my immigration status. That's not the same anymore. We should have a very strong vetting process in place, and then those who get through it should be welcomed. But there should be programs, again, to rehabilitate them. You just don't bring them in without language, without cultural differences, and then go and dump them in some part of Canada which needs more people and expect them to survive. It's not fair to the local community. It's not fair to the immigrants. So where are the programs? I don't know. I haven't seen them.
Raheel Raza, president of the Council for Muslims Facing Tomorrow and author of the book, Their Jihad, Not My Jihad. Thanks a lot for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.